Welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. On today's show, we'll be talking to Michael Brooks, who's currently the virtual CISO for a company called Abacode. We're going to talk about the challenges of getting security right in your organization, how compliance helps or hinders your efforts, how automation and even outsourcing can help you efficiently meet your compliance and security goals. Enter the discussion on Abacode. In our second segment, we're going to chat about the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, aka the CMMC program. We're going to provide an update on its status, discuss some of the pros and cons, and hopefully arrive at a notion that it is a worthy compliance program to leverage in order to meet your overall security and business goals. At least that's what I put on paper, but Josh is leading the conversation, so it could go anywhere. Join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. It's the end of the quarter. You've got a mountain of compliance tasks to complete, daily requests from sales for security documentation, and an upcoming audit. You're waiting on evidence requests, and you can't find the policy you wrote last week. Compliance management is hard. Aptable Comply makes it simple. Comply is an end-to-end, purpose-built GRC platform to manage compliance. From automating evidence collection to integrating with your existing SaaS tools, Comply simplifies the hardest parts of managing compliance. Reduce manual processes and build trust with your customers. Visit securityweekly.com/Aptable to learn more. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Legacy GRC systems cannot simplify the complex use cases and deliver powerful automation that cyber teams need. CyberSaint's integrated risk management solution ingests data from your existing tech stack, dynamically lighting up controls using patented AI. Leverage your expertise and showcase business value. Let your risk and compliance solution work for you. See why the most forward-thinking CISOs of the Fortune 500 support their teams with CyberSaint. Maximize your cybersecurity program today. Visit securityweekly.com/CyberSaint SCW.
Welcome to episode number 47 of Security and Compliance Weekly. This is recorded on October 13th, 2020. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my illustrious co-hosts, Mr. Josh Marpet, Mr. Scott Lyons, and Mr. John Snyder, Esquire. Gentlemen, welcome.
This is going to be a fun episode today.
Oh, yes, it will. I think so. Hey, Josh, you said you had a quick announcement. Now would be the time to drop it on us.
All right. So tomorrow I am moderating at noon, I believe. Hang on, I'll double check. It's at, 1 o'clock. I'm going to be moderating an ISSA Global webinar addressing the hidden risk in cloud infrastructure. That should be kind of interesting. I'm just moderating a small panel discussion, so I have very little to do with the content. But I think that the content is going to be interesting, and I'm there to make sure that the fighting is not horrible and only hand weapons are used. Okay? No ranged weapons.
Your job is to ask probing questions.
What can I say? Those probing questions are important.
They are important. As long as we're doing some announcements, would you like to have all of your favorite Security Weekly content at your fingertips? Do you want to hear from Sam and Andrea when we have upcoming webcasts and technical trainings? Do you have a question for one of our illustrious hosts, someone from the Security Weekly team, or you just wish you could hang out with the Security Weekly crew and community? You can do all this and more by subscribing to your favorite podcast catcher, signing up for our mailing list, and joining us on our Discord server, which is already blowing up today, to stay in the loop on all the things going on at Security Weekly. How do you get started? Go to securityweekly.com/subscribe, and that's where you will get started. Also, it's official. Security Weekly, in partnership with our new management, Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked, which will be on December 10th, 2020. This inaugural edition of Security Weekly Unlocked will be also celebrating Security Weekly's 15th anniversary. Registration and call for speakers is now open. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to submit your speaking session as well as registering for free. Alrighty. Let me introduce you to our guest today, Mr. Michael Brooks. He is a virtual CISO for a company called Abacode. Mike's a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, and he had over 22 years in the service, I believe he told me. He has experience within the military of being both a CIO and a CISO, which I want to ask him about. He also holds an MBA from American Military University, and he's also a CISSP as well as a PMP. Lots of letters and acronyms. That's what you do when you're in the DoD. Welcome, Mike, to Security and Compliance Weekly.
Thanks, guys. It's really great to be here. I'm excited for today's show and to have a chat with you and your audience about, how we can do cyber risk management a little bit better and how we can build effective programs. I was excited to hear that in the intro, so I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Super. Well, why don't you kick things off by telling us a little bit about yourself? Your career in the military obviously is where you got started, but how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So I transitioned from the military about 3 years ago. When I was on active duty, I was an IT and cyber operations officer for the Air Force. I started out my IT career actually on the help desk. Answering help desk calls, and then I kind of worked my way up through we have network control centers. I managed the network control centers, and then on the IT side, was leading a global IT service organization for the DoD, and then for a national agency. And then I actually did that in a deployed location in the Middle East. I was a IT service provider for about 6,000 joint warfighters in Kuwait in 2014, 2015. I finished up my career here in Tampa. I'm in Tampa, Florida. We decided to stay in Tampa when we retired at Special Operations Command, where I was working for the Special Operations Command CIO doing policy and governance work. So a fair amount of experience in the IT world. I did do some auditing as well. I did one tour as a command auditor, auditing IT command and control systems for the National Guard Bureau. That was exciting and very rewarding experience. When I transitioned from the military, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I felt a pull to stay in the security realm. So, I went to work for one of the big four consulting firms and then jumped over to a Fortune 500 company and ended up with Abacode about 1.5 years ago. The reason I transitioned to Abacode is because they're a holistic service provider, and that's where I felt I could have the most impact in my post-military career. After 20 years in uniform, the thing that's most important for me right now and a high priority is to enjoy the freedom that I've fought so hard to protect over the last 2 decades. And I think I can do that best by helping small businesses really develop strong cybersecurity programs. And that's what Abacode's all about. We're a full service provider. We say holistic, meaning that we can provide end-to-end services from the consulting services to our flagship offering, which is our 2 security operations centers, one in Tampa and the other one in Las Vegas. I really enjoy working with the clients. I do some compliance work. I've recently completed some 800-171 DIPCAC assessments and tuned in very, very closely to CMMC, on this side of the fence to see kind of how that's going to play out. So that's a little bit about me. And again, I'm excited to be here on episode 47.
That's great. And, I was a civilian working for the military sometime in the last century. I'm curious, as an IT, help desk support person in the Air Force, not that it matters, but did you ever spend any time in San Antonio out of curiosity?
Yeah, I did. I spent some time there. Spent working with, it was Air Intelligence Agency, and then as I was progressing through it, switched over to Air Force ISR Agency, and that's where a lot of our AF Cyber, Air Force Cyber Forces were attached to, and worked a great deal with those guys, both here stateside and then also in deployed locations.
Interesting. Well, I don't want to Bogart all the time talking about the past. Suffice it to say, when I was in San Antonio, which is where I got some of my early training in actually learning how to do penetration testing and ethical hacking, it wasn't called cyber back then. It was Air Force Information Warfare Center. But we can talk about that another time. It is time for that portion of the program that we like to call the hot seat questions. So I would like to ask you, as we like all our guests, and this is really simply to just get a little bit of insight into, where your head is, where your thoughts are on this vast, overwhelming, and consuming topic that we call security versus compliance. So, Mike, where do you fall on what we like to call the security versus compliance continuum?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'm actually not a big fan of the term cybersecurity. I prefer cyber risk management. And the way that I see it, both in practice and in theory, for me, cyber risk management is all about two sides of a coin, and those sides are security and compliance, right? You need both of those to keep balance and to make sure that your risk is staying in check and staying effectively managed. Now, having said that, nobody likes a team of auditors running around, and in the military, and then in the private sector, I've been through hundreds of inspections. We do command cyber inspections where they come through, and it's 800 controls, and it's 2 weeks long, and it's super painful. So, but it's a necessary evil, right? And here's the reason why. Compliance really, to me, in my mind, and this is my opinion, it establishes kind of your MVP, your minimum viable posture, right? So it's what the regulators or the statutory requirements have said is the minimum acceptable security standard, and that's what gets measured, and that's what gets audited and checked. Security itself is really more operationalized, meaning that it happens day to day, and it actually raises that bar up just a little bit in the day to day to actually apply some operational control over those security controls that you're implementing day to day. There's a lot of discussion out there about compliance and security. Compliance doesn't equal security. Again, I think you need both of them. But I do believe that just because you're compliant, it doesn't necessarily mean you're secure. And there's quite a few use cases out there, Target and some others, to name a few. So I think the focus definitely is on compliance. I think that's what's going to get businesses to pay attention. That's what's going to get them to move. And then they just need to continue to evolve their compliance posture into a really strong security posture. So again, that their cyber risk is being effectively managed.
Great. One more question for me, and then I'll turn you over to the wolves. I'm curious. Having spent a good portion of your cybersecurity career in the military, which is well regimented, and you're following orders and chain of command and all that. What was surprising to you, or what was different about coming out and seeing cybersecurity and how it's done in the private sector versus what you were accustomed to within the DoD?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, DoD has its challenges, right? They definitely have their challenges, and they've continued to have cyber challenges. And there's folks that want to kind of get into those networks and do the DoD harm. But it's a very structured environment. The controls are very well documented. They're very well defined. The risk is very well identified. The training is exceptional for the folks that are, maintaining the networks and working in cyber defense and offense now, capacity. So very structured, from an organized, trained, and equipped standpoint. The DoD does a lot of things right. The frameworks are extensive. I mean, 853, high baseline is an extensive framework. And then when you overlay that on an unclassified network, a secret network, and even a top secret network, those controls have to work. They have to be effective, and they've got to protect the nation's secrets. That's the job of those controls. As I left the military, it was a bit of a culture shock for me. I was expecting some sort of similar type structure. Now, I didn't expect the rigor to be there. That was obviously in the DoD because of the scope and the size of the private sector in terms of small business. But I was a little taken back at, and I'll call it immaturity, right? The immaturity of cybersecurity across small to medium-sized enterprises, and even the big ones, even the big four and the Fortune 500. I mean, they have gaps as well. And so I think, as I started to look at that and say, man, what is the deal here, and how can we kind of solve this? It comes back to the frameworks in my mind, and you've got to have a strong cybersecurity framework. You've got to understand what your risks are, and then you've got to employ that framework in a way that is effectively managing that risk. The other element that I think is missing in the private sector is the leadership accountability. So I think CEOs and boards and business founders, they need to know a little bit more about the cyber risk that's going on in their organizations. Most importantly, where they're accepting risk, where they may not realize it. Because they're not doing a penetration test, or they're not doing scanning, or they're not exercising their incident response plan. Those kinds of things are very, very effective ways to manage risk. And if you're not paying attention to those, from the CEO's perspective or from the board's perspective, you can start to accept a lot of risk into the organization.
Oh, I think it's time for the Wolves.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
Go for it.
Josh, you want to take first swing, or do you want me to?
I got this.
Okay.
So I really want to hit on what you just said. And by the way, just to be clear, I agree significantly with what you're saying. We have significant amounts of leadership that in terms of boards and in terms of C-level executives that don't realize that when you simply go, well, whatever we need to do to check those boxes, just check the damn boxes. Right. It means that you're accepting risk that you shouldn't necessarily be accepting, or shouldn't be accepting without much more understanding of what you're doing. I agree with you 100%. So what I'd like to ask you is, what have you seen in terms of a board? I'm being specific here. Board level risk. My perception, my understanding, my belief, I would say, is that risk is rising to board level far more than it ever did before, or the perception of risk is rising to board level far more than it ever did before. In terms of, I see risk rising higher than it ever has. Do you agree with that? I mean, talk to me about board level risk.
Yeah, I definitely agree with it. I mean, I think the challenge that I'm seeing, in the work that I'm doing on the day-to-day is the visibility and the clarity on what is that actual risk, right? So it's the reporting mechanisms that are going up to show the decision makers that we are accepting a tremendous amount of risk here. Here's why we're accepting that amount of risk, why you're accepting that amount of risk, and here's what we can do about it, right? So it's almost like there needs to be a translation layer from kind of the tactical level up to that executive level to say, okay, from your perspective, this is what this means, right? At the board level, this is what this means. We know that our attack surface, what our attack surface is. We know where our protected data is. We know where we're at risk, and we can start to manage that at a much higher level. And what that ultimately does when it's a focus item of the boards and the executives is, it really starts to permeate down through the culture. And you get this cross-functional buy-in, which is absolutely necessary, because as we all know, cybersecurity and cyber risk is not a technical issue. It's not something that the technical teams are solely dealing with.
Yeah, it's a business issue, and I've got to say I agree with you, and I disagree with you. And let me explain what I mean. I agree with you that it is a business issue and a line of business issue, and it should be split out to the lines of business. And Liam's point is, especially when people hold a title just to check a box, the privacy officer, and they're held by the HR manager or the office administrator, it really doesn't work very well. But yeah, good point, Liam. But I think that your point about we know what our attack surface is, we know where our risks are effectively, and I'm going to say wrong. I'll be honest with you, I've rarely, if ever, seen a board that was properly informed and understanding of where their attack surface is, where their prized data, their crown jewels of data are. Hell, I've rare to see a board that even knows how many computers they have in the system, okay, in their company. It is rare to see a board that is informed properly of risks, assets, all of the pieces of the equation that no doubt Jeff could throw up on screen in 30 seconds. So, Jeff, am I vaguely correct in that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, vaguely correct. And I'm not going to throw up on you.
Hey, if I could jump on that point for a minute,
Sure.
Josh.
Sure.
It is the obligation of a board to remain up to date on the business. And I think up until now, or pretty recently, the board would have considered cybersecurity to be one of these minor issues or, in the weeds issues that they don't need to be actively knowledgeable about. And insofar as, cyber attacks are a major part of life, I can foresee a scenario, and maybe we're there now, where it's not going to be good enough for the board of directors to say, we got some guy who handles that.
Yeah.
Dude, board of directors, in answering what y'all are saying, Josh and I went to the NACD conference of 2019, did some man on the street interviews. I think that's episode 3 of Security and Compliance Weekly, if you want to go and really get a good look into the way board members think, right? Board members and functional security staff once a year for a week need to trade positions. Okay. Now, if you're moving somebody from functional staff up to board, please, dear God, don't give them a voting seat, but allow them to see what's going on so that they can tailor the messages better, right? And not only in being able to tailor it to a C-level, they can tailor it to the board. But the board member needs to come down into the weeds to understand the day-to-day process of what kind of risk mitigation techniques are being employed, right? Most board members don't give two flying shits about what happens down inside of the org, okay? They say, are we making sales? Are the C-levels executing vision and strategy, right? Is there anything that a C-level that we've brought in, is there anything that could torpedo their position with us and make us have to do damage control, right? It's interesting. What needs to happen, how we fix this, right, is that board level decisions need to be held accountable for in compliance regimes.
Well, and in SOX and Sarbanes-Oxley, they are.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm referring to.
Yeah, Sarbanes-Oxley, the CFO and the CEO have to sign off stating that these tools that we use to handle the financial information are not only auditable, but that they have been audited and that they are correct. The information is effectively correct. And don't get me wrong. If it's a penny off, nobody cares. But that effectively the bulk of the information is proper, correct. It's been audited. It's right. Okay. And they allow for honest mistakes, and they allow for data shows up later, whatever. But you get the idea. So we need more like that, in my opinion. And honestly, we're going to get to this in the second segment, but CMMC is very like that. If your company is not up to par, your contract toasty.
Yeah, it's going to start costing you business. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
I mean, this is a 7-figure problem for small businesses, right? For small to medium-sized businesses. And you've got to come at that holistically. One of the things that we do in the DoD that I think the private sector could really benefit from, if you're familiar with RMF, the risk management framework, one of the steps in RMF is authorize, right? Which means somebody makes a business decision or an operational decision to say, yea, verily, run the network based on those configurations, based on this report. And that authorization is a very formal thing, right? So it's an acknowledgement of, I understand what all the risks are. I understand what our plan is. I understand what I need to be doing from the executive level to support the organization. Yea, verily, let's authorize these configurations and move forward, in the next year, 2 years, however long the authorization is. And that's why, we kind of come at it holistically, again, because cybersecurity really needs to be executed in the bounds of a program. There's a lot of vendors out there, a lot of security product out there, but you really need to make sure that those pieces are fitting together so that you've got an effective security program and not a patchwork of tooling and product.
So, speaking of which, another thing a board needs to take into account, right? And, I'm really trying to think on the fly here, so that's totally not the right words here.
Always
compliance
dangerous.
Regimes, even with my brain, compliance regimes, not only do they need to take board level decisions into effect, the other thing they need to take into effect is breaches. Okay. So we have PCI. Say that again.
Pants?
No, breaches.
I wear
not
pants.
breeches.
Breaches.
Not breeches. Breach.
Oh,
breach.
God.
Breach. Breaches. Right?
That's when the pants rip, right?
No.
Sorry, I'm English.
No. When a company
or is that
has
when the
suffered,
probing happens?
No. When a company has suffered from an intrusion from the outside, a breach, right? We publicly see that announcement, but we don't see what happens to remediate the issue, right? So if you have a company that's under PCI, the new PCI DSS should have a clause in there that says, if you have been breached, you need to come to this level of specification, right, to be able to retain your PCI, right? Guess what? It does, right? But HIPAA, SOX, Basel II, all of the other compliance regimes that are out there, they don't have a clause in there that says if you've been breached, you come out of compliance until you remediate and you show that you're back into compliance.
Yep. One of the other things too, I looked at the IBM cost of data breach report. Been looking through that pretty good over the last couple of days. Almost 50% of the breaches that they studied in that report, I think they studied like 500 organizations. Almost 50% of those breaches were caused by system misconfigurations and human error, which is somebody clicked on a link, somebody lost a laptop, completely preventable things. So it's not 100% of the time, a team of guys and gals and hoodies breaking into the company. These are self-inflicted things that are completely preventable if you had the basic controls in place. So to your point, that's where the compliance programs and the compliance requirements can really help you to make sure that you're doing those things, vis-a-vis security awareness training, secure configuration baselines, the basics, get the basics right. And that's why I like the CIS Top 20. Use that as your foundation and build off of that. When you've got that right, you can move to the next step. My football coach always used to say, we're not going to get beat on fundamentals. We're not going to get beat on fundamentals. And I would argue that in today's business world, we're getting beat on fundamentals when it comes to cybersecurity.
So what are the top three? What are the top three fundamentals in your mind?
So I think it's data, understanding where the data is. I think it's attack surface, understanding who is connecting and who can have access to that data. And then thirdly, I think it is really security awareness training. I think it's cultural because those folks are the front lines. They're the ones leaving the gates open, leaving the windows open, leaving the doors open, and they need to understand. And it's more than awareness. I think everybody understands awareness, right? It's almost like security accountability. Like you have a role to play here as a kind of a protector of the company data, and you need to take it seriously rather than, oh, here comes my training, click, 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 click. Okay, I'm done. I can keep my access to the network for another year.
Well, I would agree with what you're saying. I would agree with what you're saying, but I want to add to the awareness training and say, have empathy towards your employees. Don't sit there and be absolutely rigid and unwielding to listen to what your employees are saying or understand, what your employees are going through, right? As a manager.
I agree. I absolutely agree with that. Absolutely.
There are too many people out there that are so set in stone and so hardcore of, this is mine. You're not going to play with it, right? I'm going to control it. That they get muddled into the process of actually doing security at its basics, right?
Yeah. Right. No, I completely agree. Folks need to understand how important it is, and how important they are in the ecosystem of cybersecurity. I mean, at the very front edge, the users are it. And again, I mean, the numbers are there. 25% of the time, there's a 7-figure problem because somebody clicked on a link they weren't supposed to click on, or they were doing something that they weren't supposed to do. And being an IT guy, this is where I love my IT background, right? Because I know users only do what they're allowed to do. Right?
No. Wrong. Users do anything they can get away with. Let's be honest here. You're 100% wrong.
Managers as well. No. It's not just users. It's not just users. It's managers as well. Hold everybody culpable and accountable.
Administrators and every human being involved in a system does everything they can get away with to make their lives easier. This is the security versus usability conundrum. Do I do security or do I make it usable? And I've got that happy medium point. Great. And that's where shadow IT starts coming in. And that's where, oh, look, my administrators have internet access on their administrative accounts. Oh, gosh, I forgot to disable that.
Wait, you have administrators surfing the internet on servers? What's wrong with you?
Don't get me started. And so, I love your top three, and that was valid. I'm going to throw one in there that I think is important, and that's asset
You're allowed
discovery.
to have your own top three, Josh.
I will do that later. But I like asset discovery, and it's not just physical assets, and it's not just even virtual assets. It's also informational assets. Something on Discord, Jim Gilson was talking about how crown jewel analysis, and I started laughing and said, "Crown jewel discovery. How many companies don't even know where their crown jewels are?" You know, you've got to know.
What's a crown jewel?
Yeah, is that where the poking happens?
That's where the probing happens. No. The crown jewels are your mission critical informational assets. Okay. So if you have information that without that information, you're toasty, that is a crown jewel. Okay. If your company goes away, if you lose that information, access to that information, the processing of that information, whatever, that's a crown jewel. Okay. Number one. Number two, if you know what those are, that's great. A lot of companies don't even know what those are. They go, oh, well, it's a secret formula. You're like, well, what about, your payroll data? Well, if we lose that, all your people go away because you don't know what to pay them. Like, oh yeah, that's a problem.
And then what happens when people go away? Knowledge goes with it, right, Josh?
That's institutional memory, and that's a problem too.
That's the big challenge
I'm sorry, say again?
I was going to say that's the big challenge right now that I'm seeing with companies that are trying to get their arms around their 171 and CMMC requirements. Where's the CUI? It's in the enterprise. It's like, well, no, it needs to be kind of better identified and more segmented. And I would add a fourth one if I could, 3+1. I mean, I think the monitoring is obviously super critical, and you've got to have continuous monitoring just so you have that visibility into what's actually happening in your network, right? So you can start to, lead turn some indicators and really make sure you understand kind of what the machines are telling you in terms of what's happening in the environment.
Well, the other point to add to your CUI, most companies don't know how to classify that, right? Let alone be able to pay someone enough money to be able to classify that, let alone being able to find that person to pay that person to classify. It's Wendy Nather. Here we go, right?
But I want to throw in what Dimitri said.
Go ahead.
Scott, this is great. In addition to the crown jewels on Discord, by the way, if you're not on Discord, please, dear God, get on Discord. Okay, we have so much fun talking with people on Discord, besides the fact they take screenshots of us at our worst, and it's hilarious.
That's a great screenshot, Josh.
It is hilarious. Like, it's awesome. But Dimitri pointed out that in addition to the crown jewels, the skeletons in the closet, the known weaknesses and how the crown jewels are protected. And, of course, there's also the unknown unknowns. That's the Rumsfeld conundrum. John,
you don't know what you don't know.
What is that?
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know.
That's it.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I like Jim. Find the crustiest, oldest, grumpiest person on site and ask them about all the things that have gone wrong.
It used to be find the COBOL programmer, but it's a different generation now.
Well, it still could be COBOL depending on what company you're in.
It could be.
And yes, Liam Cyrisma can find your crown jewels. That's his selfish plug. That's legit.
Josh,
we like Liam. Liam's awesome.
Move your lips, talk silently. Need to wrap up the first segment, but Mike, I wanted to just give you a few moments here at the end to just tell us a little bit about what Abacode does, what you're working on, how you're helping to solve all this stuff that we've been talking about.
Yeah, thanks. So again, we're coming at it from a holistic standpoint. We're coming at it, a top-down approach, right? We're working with the business leaders. We're working with the IT teams. We're trying to implement, a foundational security for these companies and provide that visibility into where the risks actually are. The stats are, there's a various amount of stats out there. Bottom line is 60% of SMBs don't make it through a breach like this, right? And if you've built a company, you know how much blood, sweat, and tears goes into that, and to be taken advantage of by a cyber criminal or a misconfigured system is, those are the problems that we're trying to solve. And again, we come at it holistically. We've got our security operations center. We integrate all of our services in there to provide that risk picture to the business, both from a compliance standpoint and a security standpoint. So that's the work we're doing. We feel like we're having an impact. And again, it's, there's a lot of work to be done. The compliance driver is not going away. And as folks move more remote, as things are getting more distributed, we're certainly seeing an uptick in the malicious activity as well. So, we want to apply that expertise that we have to try to solve that problem in the small to medium-sized enterprises, and that's where we're focused.
All right, great. Thanks, Mike, for that brief introduction to Abacode. As always, we could keep these conversations going on and on, but we do need to take a break real quickly. I want to thank Mike Brooks for joining us today. And Mike, as I said, you're welcome to stay with us for the second segment. We're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about CMMC and find out what's going on there. One of these important compliance regimes or regimens that a lot of companies are starting to look into, not because they want to, but because they have to. So hold your thoughts. We're going to take a break and be right back.